Sometimes, the very thing that has the power to save the person you love the most is also the thing that could destroy you. You might think that life only asks us to choose between right and wrong, but there are moments when it forces us to choose between two heartbreaks, and neither feels survivable. You might even believe you'd never hide the truth from your own child, yet desperation has a way of reshaping a man's sense of honesty. But this isn't a story about poverty or destiny. It's a story about a single father who once made a mistake he has been running from ever since. His name is Mason Ward, a former subway technician who lost his job after a catastrophic system failure, one the public still whispers about. What no one knows is that the incident wasn't entirely his fault, and the guilt he carries is heavier than the world will ever understand. Now, Mason's days are consumed by caring for his son, Liam, a bright-eyed boy battling a rare immune disorder that demands treatments Mason can no longer afford. Every night, Mason promises Liam that he will be okay, even though fear clings to his own ribs like a second skin. And just when Mason believes he has run out of options, fate crosses his path with someone who sees deeper into his life than he ever intended. This is where the real story begins, one that will test how far a father is willing to go, not for redemption, but for the life of his child. That night, long after the last subway rumbled beneath the city and the world above quieted into a soft mechanical hum, Mason Ward sat at the edge of his son's bed, listening to the faint rattle of Liam's breathing. It was a sound he had memorized, each tremor in his lungs, each pause that lasted a heartbeat too long, each shallow inhale that made Mason's own chest tighten as if the universe were trying to breathe through him instead. The moonlight spilled through the cracked blinds in thin silver bars, casting prison-like stripes over the room, and Mason couldn't help thinking that the metaphor wasn't subtle. He had lived inside an invisible cell for months now, trapped between the mistake he had made and the consequences that kept chasing him like a shadow that refused to detach. Liam stirred, a small hand reaching out blindly until it found Mason's arm. The boy didn't open his eyes, but his fingers curled around his father's sleeve, anchoring themselves as if Mason were the only stable point in a world threatening to disappear beneath him. "Dad, you're still here," Liam murmured in his sleep, the words drifting out like a fragile secret. Mason swallowed hard. He didn't deserve those words, not when the truth of the subway accident still clung to him like soot that wouldn't wash off no matter how many times he scrubbed. The next morning arrived with the harshness of fluorescent light and the bitter taste of instant coffee. Mason walked to the clinic, 2 blocks from their apartment, carrying Liam's medical folder under his arm. The folder felt heavier with each visit, not because the papers multiplied, but because every page held a piece of a future slowly narrowing. Doctors always spoke in careful tones, measured words, soft reassurances that never quite masked the unavoidable reality. Liam's immune disorder was rare, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Treatment existed, yes, but it required money, consistency, and hope. 3 things Mason was running dangerously low on. The hallway outside the examination room buzzed with the faint murmur of machines. Liam sat on the chair swinging his legs, pretending not to notice the needle tray on the counter. Mason squeezed his shoulder. "Well, get through this," he whispered. He didn't know if he was promising his son or himself. After the appointment, they stepped out onto the street, just as the city's pulse began to quicken. People brushed past them, each wrapped in their own concerns, their own invisible burdens. Mason had grown used to being unseen. It was easier that way. If no one looked at him, no one could recognize him as the technician from the viral news clip, the man whose silence in the aftermath had only deepened public suspicion. But fate, as Mason would soon learn, had a strange way of pulling a man into the light when he least wanted it. It happened at the subway platform later that afternoon. Mason and Liam had stopped there on their way home because Liam liked watching the trains roar by. It made him feel like the world was bigger than his illness. As they waited, the overhead lights flickered once, twice, as if the station itself were clearing its throat before speaking. Then a child cried out. Mason looked up to see a small boy, a stranger, collapse near the yellow safety line. People gasped but froze, uncertainty pinning them in place. Instinct snapped through Mason like electricity. He dropped Liam's backpack, rushed forward, and knelt beside the boy. His breaths were shallow, his eyelids fluttering. Heat radiated from his forehead like a fevered beacon. "Call emergency services," Mason shouted. But someone else was already there, a woman who moved with sharp, practiced certainty. She knelt opposite Mason, her hair tied back, her eyes focused and unflinching. "Step back. I'm a physician," she said, though her tone carried no arrogance, only urgency. Mason obeyed, pulling the child gently into her reach. She checked his pulse, lifted his chin, assessed his airways. Her hands moved with a confidence that only came from years of training or years of mistakes. The boy's mother sobbed nearby. "Is he dying? Please, please help him!" The woman didn't answer immediately. She pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck again, her brows tightening. Then, with sudden clarity, she reached into her bag, pulled out an injector pen, and administered it to the child's thigh. Within seconds, the boy's chest rose deeper, steadier. The mother collapsed in relief. And the woman finally exhaled. Only then did her eyes flick toward Mason and linger just a fraction too long, as though she recognized something about him. Not his face, not his clothes, but the weight he carried. "Good reflexes?" she said softly. "Most people hesitate." Mason blinked. "You didn't." Her expression flickered. "I've hesitated before." She stood, helping the boy's mother steady him. Then she turned to Mason once more. "My name is Dr. Aurora Hale." And with those 5 words, Mason's fate began to shift quietly, inexorably, like the slow turning of a key in a lock he never knew existed. For the rest of that afternoon, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Aurora Hale's gaze had lingered not out of curiosity, but recognition. The kind of recognition that made the hairs on his arms prickle, not because she knew who he was, but because it felt as though she saw through him, through the exhaustion he never spoke of, through the guilt he pretended he no longer carried, through the fear he kept hidden from Liam. As the emergency team arrived to take over, Aurora stepped back, wiped her hands with calm precision, and nodded once at the paramedics. She didn't wait for gratitude. She didn't bask in attention. She simply pivoted, slung her bag across her shoulder, and walked toward the exit. Mason thought that was the end of it. But fate, persistent, intrusive, and strangely well-timed, had other plans. "Dad," Liam whispered beside him, tugging at his sleeve. She dropped something. Mason looked down. A slim tablet device lay near the edge of the bench, its screen still active, displaying diagrams of cellular structures he couldn't understand. He picked it up, glanced toward the turnstiles, and saw Aurora stepping onto the escalator. He should have hesitated. He should have thought twice, but something gratitude, curiosity, destiny propelled him forward. "Liam, stay right here. Don't move." He dashed toward the escalator. "Dr. Hale, you forgot this." She turned, eyes widening slightly at the sight of her research tablet in his hand. Her steps paused, the escalator carrying her upward while Mason climbed against its downward flow. When he reached her, slightly breathless, she accepted the tablet with a small but genuine nod. "You should be careful with your equipment," Mason said, trying to sound casual. "I usually am." Her expression softened. "Thank you." Before she could turn away, Mason added, "You saved that boy without even blinking." Aurora's jaw flexed as if she were weighing the meaning of the compliment. "That's the job," she replied quietly. "Or, it used to be." Something in her tone sharpened Mason's attention. There was a heaviness there, a weight not unlike his own. She glanced past him, down to where Liam waited patiently. "Is that your son?" "Yes," Mason said, straightening. "Liam. Hess, not well." Aurora's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "I noticed the way he stands. The slight tension in the shoulders. Immune disorder?" Mason's breath caught. "How did you? I've spent the last 12 years studying these conditions. I recognize the signs." She paused. "May I speak to him?" Mason hesitated. "You don't let strangers near your sick child. Not in the city. Not after everything that's happened." But something about Aurora wasn't threatening, only intense, focused, and deeply observant. They descended together. Liam looked up when she approached. Shy but curious, Aurora lowered herself to one knee so she was at his eye level. "Hi, Liam," she said gently. "I'm Aurora. I'm a doctor." Liam blinked. "A real one?" Aurora smiled, and it was the kind of smile a person gives when they forget they've forgotten how. "A real one." Liam pointed at her bag. "Is that where you keep the magic stuff? Something like that?" she chuckled. Mason watched the exchange with a mix of warmth and unease. He wasn't used to strangers being kind to them, not without an agenda, pity, or ulterior motives. Aurora rose, dusting off her coat. "Listen," she said, turning to Mason. "Your son's condition. Does he have access to consistent treatment?" The question pierced deeper than she knew. "We manage," Mason said tightly. A lie so practiced it nearly sounded true. Aurora didn't challenge it. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small card. "If you ever need a consultation, or a second opinion, call this number. I can review his file." Mason stared at the card. Aurora Hale, MD, Immunology and Genetic Research. He swallowed. "Why offer this? You don't know us." Aurora's eyes shifted into something darker, deeper, old. "Because sometimes," she said, "we help strangers for reasons we can't explain yet." Before Mason could respond, the next train roared into the station, blasting a gust of metallic air past them. Aurora stepped backward toward the platform. "Take care of your son, mister?" "Ward," he replied. Her gaze flickered just slightly, as if the name meant something. "Take care of him, Mr. Ward." And then she was gone, disappearing into the train like a figure slipping behind a curtain between worlds. Mason had no idea that left behind in her mind, quiet, sharp, unspoken, was this thought. "I've seen that name before. And if I'm right, then this man's story is far more complicated than even he realizes." For a while, after Aurora disappeared into the departing train, Mason stood frozen, gripping Liam's hand as if the world might suddenly tilt. The platform gradually emptied, the metallic echo fading into the tunnels, but her presence lingered like a faint electrical charge in the air. He didn't know why her brief conversation unsettled him, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made old memories stir, like dust drifting after years untouched. That night at home, after Liam fell asleep, Mason placed Aurora's card on the kitchen table. The dim light from the cheap overhead bulb washed it in a pale yellow glow. He stared at it for several minutes, feeling a strange conflict tug inside him. He'd met dozens of doctors over the years, specialists, researchers, consultants, but none of them had ever looked at him the way Aurora did, as though she recognized something he wasn't aware had been revealing. And then there was that flicker barely perceptible when he told her his name. Ward. It was a simple surname, a common one, and yet she reacted as if she'd stumbled onto a puzzle piece she'd been missing. He shook his head. Maybe he was overthinking. Exhaustion could twist shadows into monsters, and casual glances into hidden meanings. The next morning, rain swept the city in sheets. Mason walked Liam to school, clutching an umbrella that bent backward in the wind like a failing wing. Liam clung to his father's hand, coughing weakly, but still trying to smile. "Dad," he said between sniffles, "do you think you'll see that doctor lady again? She was nice. Not like the ones who poke me without talking first." Mason forced a small smile. "Maybe," he answered. "If we're lucky." Liam nodded, satisfied, and ran toward the school doors. But Mason didn't go home. Instead, he found himself wandering the city with no clear destination. His thoughts kept circling back to the look Aurora gave him. The near recognition. The intuition she had about Liam's condition. The gentle way she spoke to his son. And the single question she left hanging between them. Does he have access to consistent treatment? He hated that question because it forced him to confront the truth he was falling behind. Bills were piling up. His insurance barely covered basic medications. The more specialized therapies were luxuries he simply couldn't afford anymore. A harsh gust of wind snapped him out of his thoughts. He ducked into a small cafe to escape the rain. The warmth inside was a sharp contrast to the cold pressing against the windows. As Mason sat with a lukewarm cup of coffee, he finally pulled out his phone and typed the number from Aurora's card. His finger hovered over the call button for a long time. Then he locked the phone again. No, he couldn't drag another person into his problems. Every time he let someone in, the end result was disappointment. Either they walked away, or they realized how complicated his life was, or they tried to fix things in ways that only made everything worse. He finished his coffee, stood up, and left the cafe. But the universe, in its peculiar sense of timing, wasn't interested in his refusal. 3 days later, Liam collapsed. It happened at dawn. Mason woke to a thud, rushed to the bathroom, and found Liam crumpled on the tiled floor, his skin pale, his breath shallow. panic seized him so violently that he almost couldn't speak when he called emergency services. They rushed to the hospital. Machines beeped in frantic rhythms around Liam's small frame. Doctors murmured terms Mason recognized but didn't want to hear. Immune crash, systemic flare, unstable markers. He felt himself unravel, completely. Hours passed in a blur until a nurse approached him. "Mr. Ward, someone is here to see you." Mason frowned. "Who?" But before the nurse could answer, a familiar voice drifted from behind her. "I heard what happened," Aurora said softly. "I'm glad I arrived in time." She stepped into the hallway, rain still clinging to her coat, hair damp from the storm outside. She looked as though she hadn't slept either. "How did you know we were here?" Mason asked, startled. Aurora held up her tablet. "I didn't, but I've been researching a case, and it led me straight to your son." Mason's blood chilled. "A case? What are you talking about?" Aurora took a breath, steadying herself. "Mason, I need to speak with you privately. There's something about Liam's condition and about you that you deserve to know." Her eyes were not the eyes of a stranger anymore. They were the eyes of someone standing at the edge of a truth too heavy to carry alone. The private consultation room was small, quiet, and bathed in a muted blue light that made everything feel colder than it should. Mason sat across from Aurora, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. Outside the door, Liam lay hooked up to IV lines and monitors that blinked like distant stars, cold, clinical, indifferent. The rhythmic beeping was the only reminder that time was still moving, even though Mason felt suspended between fear and dread. Aurora watched him for a moment, studying the tension in his posture, the exhaustion carved into the corners of his eyes. "Before I explain anything," she began softly, "I need you to stay calm. What I'm about to tell you will sound overwhelming." Mason's jaw tightened. "Just tell me what's going on with my son." Aurora drew in a slow breath. "I've been conducting a genetic mapping study for the past year focused on rare immune disorders. During that study, I isolated a series of gene patterns that create unusually unstable immune responses. Only 7 documented cases exist worldwide. 6 of them are children." She paused. "Your son is one of them." Mason felt the floor shift beneath him. "What does that mean? Can it be treated?" "Yes," Aurora said carefully, "but only with targeted therapy. Something experimental. Something I've been working on." She lifted her tablet and pulled up a diagram of cellular pathways, overlapping structures glowing in pale holographic blue. "Liam's genetic markers match a cluster I've only seen once before." Mason swallowed hard. "Once before?" Aurora hesitated. A long pause stretched between them. "Yes," she admitted at last. "In another patient. Years ago." Her voice faltered barely, but enough for Mason to notice. "And that treatment didn't go as planned." Mason's heart hammered against his ribs like a fist. "Are you saying Liam might die from this?" "I'm saying," Aurora replied, leaning forward, "that without intervention, Liam's condition will deteriorate. And soon. The collapse this morning was not random. It was the beginning of systemic instability." The words fell like shards of ice. Mason closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "What does this have to do with me? You said something earlier, about a case leading you to us." Aurora nodded slowly. "Because the markers Liam carries, they don't come from random mutation. They're inherited." She studied him, her gaze sharper now, more deliberate. "Which means someone in his bloodline carries the same anomaly." Mason stared at her blankly. "Inherited? But I'm fine." "Are you?" Aurora asked quietly. "You've never experienced sudden fatigue? Unexplained fevers? Periodic immunological crashes you chalked up to stress or work conditions?" He opened his mouth to deny it, but the truth rose like bile. The late-night chills, the sudden weakness he hid from Liam, the fainting spell he blamed on dehydration. Aurora saw the realization cross his face. "I thought so," she murmured. "Mason, you didn't just pass the disorder to Liam. You are the key to understanding it." For a moment, neither spoke. The air itself seemed to thicken. At last, Mason whispered, "What are you asking me to do?" Aurora folded her hands. Her expression changed, not cold, not calculating, but burdened. "The therapy I've been developing needs a biological anchor. A model. Someone who carries the adult expression of the same markers. If you participate in my trial, I can build a treatment tailored specifically for Liam. Mason froze. A trial? You mean experiment on me? No. Aurora shook her head firmly. Not experiment. Collaborate. But yes, it carries risks. Physical risks. Health risks. Possibly severe ones. Her voice softened. But you're the only living adult whose genome matches Liam's profile closely enough for me to calibrate treatment. A sharp, crushing silence filled the room. Mason leaned back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the universe descend on him. So you're telling me the only way to save my son is to put myself in danger? Aurora looked directly into his eyes. No, she said. I'm telling you the only way to save him is with you. The door clicked softly as a nurse passed through the hallway outside. Mason's hands trembled. He didn't fear pain. He didn't fear risk. He feared leaving Liam without a father. As though sensing the storm in his thoughts, Aurora added quietly, "You're not alone in this. I'll be with you every step of the trial, I promise." He didn't know why, but her words struck something deep within him, something tender and bruised. For the first time since the accident, Mason felt the shape of a choice forming, one that could save his son, or destroy him. Mason didn't answer Aurora. He couldn't. His mind was a storm of fear, disbelief, and the fragile thread of hope she had just dangled before him. He stood, paced once across the small room, then braced both palms against the cold metal counter beneath the window. The city outside was washed in pale morning light, but everything inside him felt dark and unsettled. Aurora gave him space. She didn't speak. She didn't push. She simply waited, hands folded, expression steady but softened by something he couldn't quite name: regret, perhaps, or understanding. Finally, Mason found his voice. What exactly does this trial involve? Aurora rose from her chair and approached him slowly, as if careful not to startle him. Her tone remained clinical, but her eyes carried something more human. A series of cellular reprogramming treatments, she explained. It's not surgery, not in the traditional sense. It's targeted modulation of your immune response using a prototype serum. There will be infusions, monitoring, neurological scans, and, she hesitated, side effects. Some may be mild. Others, not. Mason turned to face her. Not? Aurora looked down. Fatigue, disorientation, possible immune destabilization. In rare cases, temporary organ stress. And we haven't tested the therapy on an adult before. She lifted her gaze. You would be the first. A cold chill slid across Mason's back. So you want me to be your test subject? No, Aurora said firmly. I want you to be the partner who helps me create a treatment for your son. I can't do this without you. And Liam won't survive without something more advanced than what traditional medicine can offer. Mason sank into the nearest chair. He felt the world narrowing into a tunnel with only two exits. One leading to the unknown, the dangerous. The other leading to the slow diminishing of his child's life. Neither path felt merciful. As if sensing his despair, Aurora pulled another chair and sat across from him. Mason, she said carefully, I lost a patient during an early phase of this research. A little girl named Elise. She had the same markers as Liam. I promised myself I would never let another child suffer the same fate, not if I could prevent it. That's why I approached you. Why I couldn't walk away after the subway station. Her voice trembled on the last words, just barely, but enough to tell Mason that her resolve was woven from grief and guilt as much as ambition. He exhaled shakily. So this isn't just science for you? No, Aurora replied. This is redemption. A soft knock on the door interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in. Mr. Ward, your son is awake. Hess asking for you? Mason shot to his feet. For a second, he forgot Aurora entirely. The only thing that mattered was that Liam needed him. Aurora stepped aside, nodding. Go. We can continue this after you've spoken with him. Mason hurried down the hall. The heart monitors beeped steadily as he entered the room. Liam lay propped up on a pillow, his cheeks pale but his eyes brightening when he saw his father. Dad, he whispered. Mason sat beside him, brushing damp hair from his forehead. Hey, buddy! You scared me. Sorry. Liam's voice cracked. I just felt tired. The kind of tired that wasn't normal for an 8-year-old. The kind that stripped years off a parent's life. Liam's fingers curled weakly around his father's wrist. Dad, am I getting worse? The question hit with the force of a blow. Mason swallowed the ache in his throat. We're going to figure this out, he said. I promise. Liam nodded, trusting him completely. That trust felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. When Liam drifted back to sleep, Mason stepped out into the hallway, pressing his hand to his eyes as if he could hold himself together by force. But Aurora was waiting, quiet, composed, watching him with a softness she didn't try to hide. Now you understand, she murmured. Liam doesn't have time. The window to intervene is closing. If we want to save him, we have to start soon. Mason looked at her, truly looked. Her exhaustion, her determination, the fire in her that refused to dim even under guilt and failure. And he realized something unsettling. He trusted her, not fully, not blindly, but instinctively. All right, he said finally, his voice steady despite the tremor inside him. Aurora blinked. All right. What? Mason drew a breath, sealing the fate he could no longer outrun. I'll do the trial. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, relief, fear, and responsibility crashing together. Then, Aurora said softly, your life and your son's just entered a new chapter. The research facility Aurora brought Mason to did not look like the kind of place where life-altering experiments happened. It was tucked between an old library and a shuttered pharmacy, the kind of building most people walked past without noticing. But once inside, the sterile air, muted lighting, and soft electronic hum gave the unmistakable impression that this was a world built on precision and secrets. Aurora guided Mason through a long corridor lined with frosted glass doors. This wing is private. Only my authorized team has clearance, she explained. Everything we do here remains confidential. Mason's stomach tightened. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid of what his absence might mean for Liam. Aurora reassured him gently. The sessions are short. You'll always be able to return to your son afterward. A small part of him clung desperately to that reassurance. In the primary lab room, an assistant Dr. Riva Patel greeted them, her expression kind but sharp with focus. Mr. Ward, she said with a slight nod, Dr. Hale has briefed me. He'll be monitoring your vitals and cellular data. Mason nodded stiffly. He wasn't accustomed to being the center of attention, especially not in a place where people spoke in terms he barely understood. Aurora gestured to a reclining medical chair. Well, start with baseline scans. No infusions yet. Just data collection. Mason sat, the chair cold beneath him. Electrodes warmed against his skin as Dr. Patel attached them one by one. Aurora dimmed the lights slightly. This will take about 10 minutes, she said softly. Try to breathe normally. Her voice grounded him. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythmic beeps of the machine settle into something familiar, almost hypnotic. For a moment, he imagined Liam's laughter echoing in the background, a memory he clung to for courage. When the scans finished, Aurora reviewed the data instantly, her brows lifting. As I suspected, your immune response is fluctuating even at rest. There are irregular spikes. She turned the screen toward Mason, though he barely understood the graphs. This instability is part of the inheritance pattern. It explains Liam's vulnerability. Mason exhaled heavily. How long has this been inside me? Your whole life, Aurora answered gently. But something stress, the accident, or overexertion likely activated its expression. The accident. The subway failure. The event he had shoved into the deepest corner of his memory. Before he could speak, Aurora continued, We're not here to relive your trauma, Mason. Only to understand the biology. She paused. But if that event marked the start of your symptoms, it will help us map your progression. Dr. Patel approached with a tray. Well, begin the first phase today, microdose introduction. Very low level. Enough to observe your cellular reaction. A faint tremor moved through Mason's hands. Will it hurt? Aurora shook her head, though her eyes flickered with unspoken caution. It may cause warmth, dizziness, or slight nausea. Nothing severe. He took a breath, nodded. Do it. The infusion needle slid into his arm with a gentle pressure. A coolness spread up his vein, followed by a slow bloom of heat that drifted beneath his skin. The world sharpened, then softened, colors blurring at the edges like watercolors bleeding onto a page. Aurora stayed beside him the entire time, her presence steadying. You're doing well, she murmured. Just breathe. The warmth intensified, rolling through his chest like a rising tide. Mason gritted his teeth, clutching the sides of the chair. His heartbeat thudded loudly, not painful, but powerful, as though echoing from somewhere miles deep. Doctor. Patel monitored the screens. Spike in T-cell reaction. High, but within expected limits. Aurora's voice remained calm, but her fingers curled around the back of Mason's chair in restrained concern. Stay with me, Mason. He forced his eyes open. Aurora's face blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. What's happening? He gasped. Your body is recognizing the serum, Aurora explained quickly. It's responding, not rejecting. This is good, good. The word floated somewhere far away, unreachable. Then, slowly like a fog lifting, the sensations eased. His breathing steadied. The tightness in his chest dissolved, leaving behind only exhaustion. Aurora exhaled, shoulders sinking in visible relief. First phase complete, she announced. You handled it better than I predicted. Mason leaned back, sweat cooling on his temples. That felt like getting hit by lightning wrapped in a warm blanket. Despite the tension of the moment, Aurora gave a small, genuine laugh. That's unusually accurate. Dr. Patel smiled faintly. Some patients describe it as a wave. You described it as a storm and a comfort. Mason tried to smile back, but fatigue tugged at him. When can I see Liam? Aurora stepped closer. Right now. I won't keep you any longer today. She hesitated, then added quietly, You were brave. He shook his head. No, I'm just a dad. Aurora's gaze softened. That's another word for brave, Mason. As they left the lab, the weight of the unknown trailed behind him, but for the first time since Liam fell ill, he sensed the faint outline of hope. Hope shaped by danger, hope fueled by sacrifice. Hope carried in his blood. The days that followed moved with an eerie rhythm, measured, structured, yet weighed down by the knowledge that every hour mattered. Mason found himself living in two parallel worlds. One inside the sterile halls of Aurora's research facility, where machines hummed and data pulsed with cold objectivity. The other inside the quiet hum of Liam's hospital room, where hope felt like a fragile thread they both clung to. Each morning, the treatment intensified. Aurora warned him it would. On the third session, Mason felt the effects before the needle even entered his skin. His limbs trembled. His temperature rose. His vision swam for seconds at a time. Aurora monitored it all with precise calm, but the worry in her eyes crept closer to the surface with every spike on the monitors. Mason, you don't need to push yourself this hard, she murmured as she applied cooling packs to his arms. Your body is reacting faster than we modeled. He forced a strained smile. Maybe I'm just an overachiever. She didn't laugh this time. Instead, she placed her hand lightly on his shoulder, grounding him. Promise me you'll tell me if something feels wrong. It already feels wrong, he whispered. But stopping would feel worse. Aurora didn't argue. She knew there was no force on earth stronger than a father's desperation. That evening, Mason returned to Liam's hospital room, moving slower than before. Each step felt borrowed from strength he no longer had. He caught his reflection in the window, pale, drained, eyes ringed with shadows. He looked like a man haunted by the storm inside him. Liam glanced up from his sketchbook. Dad, you look tired. Mason ruffled his hair, fighting the tremor in his hand. Long day, buddy. What are you drawing? Liam held up the paper, a messy but determined crayon sketch of a man in a lab coat holding a glowing shield. It's Dr. Hale. She's like a superhero. Mason chuckled weakly. Yeah, she kind of is. Liam's eyes softened into something older than his years. She's helping me, right? Like really helping me? Mason nodded. She is. And you're helping her, Liam added, though Mason had never told him so. You always help people. The words struck deeper than any needle Aurora had guided into his veins. But something else lingered beneath Liam's innocence, something Mason could not ignore. A quiet awareness, a faint worry. Dad, Liam whispered. Promise me you won't leave. Not for real. Mason froze. The oxygen monitor beeped softly. Rain tapped the window. The air thickened. He pulled his son into a gentle hug, ignoring the way his own muscles protested. I'm not going anywhere, he murmured, hoping the universe wasn't listening closely enough to punish a lie disguised as love. Later that night, when Liam slept, Mason stepped into the corridor. The dim hall stretched ahead, empty except for the echo of a single pair of footsteps approaching. Aurora. She carried a folder pressed tightly to her chest. Her expression was unusually tense, as if she were wrestling with something she couldn't quite contain. "Mason," she began. "We need to talk." The urgency in her voice chilled him. "What is it?" Aurora opened the folder. Inside were pages of data, scans, progression charts. "I analyzed today's results. Your immune system isn't just reacting, it's accelerating. Much faster than expected," he frowned. "Accelerating how?" Aurora tapped a graph. "You're producing cellular changes that took months to appear in pediatric cases. Your body is adapting to the serum, but unpredictably, this could make the treatment far more effective for Liam, but it also increases the risk to you." "How much risk?" Mason asked quietly. Aurora closed the folder. "Enough that I should suspend your participation." Silence slammed between them. Mason's heart pounded. "No. If it's working too well," Aurora snapped, her composure cracking for the first time since he met her. She took a shaky breath. "You could go into systemic shock, organ overload, neurological collapse. I won't lose another patient. I won't lose you." The last two words slipped out before she could pull them back. Mason stared at her. "Aurora." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You matter in this equation. I thought I could distance myself, treat you like any other participant, but I can't. Every risk you take feels like a weight I placed on your shoulders." She looked away, ashamed of her own honesty. Mason felt something shift, subtle, fragile, terrifying. "Aurora," he whispered, "Liam is stable today. Because of you. Because of what we're doing." "That doesn't justify losing you," she murmured. But Mason shook his head. "If there's even a chance this treatment will save Liam, I'm not stopping, not now." Her breath caught fear and reluctant resolve warring in her eyes. "You're asking me to walk a line that could break us both," she said. "I'm asking you not to give up," he replied. "Not on him. Not on this." Slowly, painfully, Aurora nodded. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we continue." But in the silence that followed, both of them understood the truth. Tomorrow could change everything. The next morning unfolded with a strange, heavy stillness, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Mason walked through the research facility's entrance, each step echoing louder than it should have. His body still ached from yesterday's session, but beneath the exhaustion pulsed an undeniable urgency. Something was shifting inside him, cellular, emotional, existential. He felt it in ways he couldn't articulate, like a second heartbeat whispering beneath the first. Aurora was waiting in the lab, but something about her was different. Her posture was sharper, her shoulders tense, as if she had armored herself overnight. Dr. Patel stood behind her, scrolling through data with tight brows. "Mason," Aurora said, voice calm but controlled. "Before we proceed, I need your informed consent again. Today's treatment is a higher microdose. You may feel stronger reactions." Mason nodded. "I already told you. I'm ready." Her jaw tightened, not in disagreement, but in fear she didn't have the luxury of expressing. She motioned to the chair. "Let's begin." As he settled in, Dr. Patel prepared the infusion. The needle slid in, and the serum began its slow, deliberate descent into his bloodstream. At first, the sensation was familiar, an expanding warmth, a tightening in his chest. But this time, the heat surged faster, blooming into a blaze that raced through his limbs like wildfire. Mason hissed, gripping the chair. "Hot. Too hot." His vision fractured into shards of light. The room tilted. Every sound stretched into slow echoes, Aurora calling his name, machines beeping in frantic rhythms, the rush of blood pounding in his ears like a collapsing wave. Dr. Patel's voice cut sharply through the noise. "His markers are spiking. T-cell production has doubled, no, tripled within seconds." Aurora leaned close, her hands bracing his shoulders. "Mason, listen to me. Stay present. Breathe with me." Her voice anchored him barely. But the serum roared inside him like a storm. For a moment, he felt weightless, disconnected, as though his consciousness hovered inches above his body, suspended by threads too thin to trust. Then slowly the storm settled, the fire receded, leaving behind a trembling exhaustion that threatened to pull him under. Aurora removed the IV and pressed cool compresses to his skin. Her hands were gentle but shaking. "Are you with us?" she whispered. Mason nodded weakly. "Yeah, barely." Felt like drowning in sunlight. Dr. Patel exhaled with relief, jotting notes. This reaction is unprecedented. Hess adapting at a rate we've never documented before. Aurora didn't respond. She was still staring at Mason, the way his skin seemed to hum faintly beneath the surface. The way the redness draining from his neck revealed no residual rash, no signs of collapse. Something miraculous and terrifying was unfolding. When Mason finally sat upright, he noticed Aurora watching him with a different expression, one caught between awe and dread. "What?" he asked hoarsely. Aurora swallowed. "Your body isn't just tolerating the serum, it's synchronizing with it." She hesitated. This level of responsiveness? I've only seen fragments of it in Elise's early data, before her case deteriorated. But you're stabilizing the way the model predicted an ideal host would. "Is that good?" Mason asked. Aurora hesitated. "It's good for Liam." Then softly, "But it's dangerous for you." Mason rubbed his forehead. "If it means saving him, he'll take the danger." She flinched, as though the words physically struck her. Before she could reply, Dr. Patel turned toward them. "There's something else. We detected an anomaly in the neural scan. Something activated when the serum reached the blood-brain barrier." Aurora stiffened. "Define anomaly." Patel rotated the monitor. "Enhanced neural conductivity. Increased pattern complexity. Look here, this spike." Mason frowned. "What does that mean?" Aurora took a long breath, then met his eyes. "It means the serum isn't just changing your immune system, it's influencing neurological pathways as well." Mason blinked. "So changing?" Aurora nodded slowly. "Yes, and at a speed that defies every projection we've made." He leaned back, absorbing the revelation with a mixture of unease and resignation. "As long as it helps, Liam," he said again. Aurora closed her eyes, not in agreement, but in agony. "Mason, you keep saying that, but have you considered what happens if your body reaches a threshold it can't come back from?" He held her gaze. "Have you considered what happens if I don't?" She inhaled sharply, unable to argue. At last she whispered, "You're risking everything." "I'm a father," he answered. "That's part of the job description." Her eyes softened, pain and admiration merging into one expression she tried to hide. "Then tomorrow," Aurora said quietly, "well, move to phase 2. A chill swept through him, but he nodded. Because the truth was simple. He had come too far to turn back. And the path ahead, dangerous, irreversible, was one he would walk for his son. Phase 2 began before dawn.